So as I mentioned off the top of the show, I thought it would be a pretty a neat thing to look at or take a look back very briefly at many of our guests that we've had on our show, making our show and this year one of the best years for our show that we've had since we've started about 3 years ago. A lot of great guests giving us really good information, and I thought it would be great just to circle back and hear what our great guests had to say.
Yeah, well, you know something, I hate taxes. I really hate them. And it just takes money out of people's pockets. I have a little philosophy that you keep money into people's pockets. They'll go out, no, we'll go out for dinner, buy a piece of furniture, put a renovation on. And if they have less money in their pockets, they aren't going to do that. So the really good news is we've never raised a tax. Think of that, Alan. We've never raised a tax on businesses or people in 5.5 years. We don't plan on it. We plan on getting revenue through growth. And we've seen growth. Our budget when we first walked through Queen's Park was 150 billion. We grew revenues by $52 billion through growth, not through raising taxes, through economic development and prosperity. But I get it. I hear it all the time, Alan. People are struggling right now, no matter if it's the high fuel cost, and we're going to see the federal government jack up the carbon tax, which is just, you can't even comprehend why they do that. Increasing carbon tax by 23%, taking more money out of the pockets of people because everything gets delivered. The food gets delivered to the stores on these trucks. They go get delivered products on trains and planes, but they're just gouging the people. It's unacceptable. I'll never raise a tax. I don't believe in taxes. I believe in growth and revenue.
I don't think AI is going to go away. I think it's about how do you embrace it, and it's going to continue to grow. I wouldn't be overexposed, but I have long been a proponent of you don't invest in one country, one currency, one company, one sector. And, like to me, this is an important point. If you've not gone through, as John would say, the asset allocation and made sure that it's aligned to who you are as an investor, time horizon, and risk tolerance. I too like ETFs. We have a variety of different things in the portfolio, but at this point in time, I'm making sure I'm not too exposed to the tech sector, but I'm not prepared to abandon it. That's for sure.
Look, there is no question that businesses have been through hell and back over the last number of years. And every time we think that we're on some pathway to recovery, some other shock happens to the system. And not just international shocks, we've had a few of those, but so many goals against our own net, where we put in place dumb policies and stupid regulations that seem to drag the economy back. And so there's no question we do have a productivity challenge in Canada, and the productivity challenge in Canada is not because we have a less robust, less entrepreneurial business community. It's because we are fighting with one hand tied behind our back when governments throw all sorts of crap our way with new regulations and new or higher taxes again and again and again. So we got to fix that. And that's why my organization exists, is to push for public policy changes to ensure that businesses can grow and get ahead, hire more people and become more productive. And in doing that, bring in more tax revenue that helps fund the social services that we as Canadians seem to like.
Tim, what do you think about a flat tax as opposed to having all these different tax brackets? A lot easier, a lot simpler.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you say simpler. I think that's the argument for people who are looking or suggesting that flat tax makes sense. It is simpler for sure, but I've never really bought into the idea that it's actually very practical or necessary. For one thing, like I mentioned earlier, most of Canada's higher income earners don't actually mind a progressive tax system. It's just how progressive is it, right? How high do those rates get? So I don't think a progressive tax system is necessarily a bad thing, and a flat tax is simpler. But what I think we do need to simplify the tax system is tax reform. We have not had a Royal Commission on Taxation since the 1960s, when the Carter Commission was established, and they came up with some pretty sweeping changes to our tax legislation at that time. And that's really what we need again. And that will help to, with the view of simplifying, make the system fairer if you think there are things about it that aren't fair, but to simplify it as well. I just don't really think a flat tax is going to be the right answer. I think you'll always come across scenarios where somebody needs a tax preference because of this or that or another thing, and you're going to get back to where we are again. So I'm not sure that's going to be a solution.
On the flat tax issue, I'm generally in favor. I mean, if we look at Alberta recently had a system where they had a 10% flat tax and they also had a 10% corporate income tax. So they were actually treating it equal across to Fred's point about neutrality and, a dollar is a dollar essentially. And, another country as well to look at is Estonia. So they currently have a flat tax across the board for their sales tax, for their income tax, and for their corporate tax at about 20%. And I believe it's actually going up to about 22% soon. But they're a very successful country, even though they're not a very well-known country in terms of their economic progress over the last 30 years or so. They have one of the highest business startup rates in the world, one of the highest in Europe. They also have a very robust economy in terms of productivity growth, very good education system and other things as well. So I'm actually generally in favor of a flat tax system, mainly due to making it a more simpler system, so that you're not punishing people as their income rises and they're being more productive in the economy as well. Because right now there is a bit of that penalty with the progressive system, whereas you earn more money and more of it gets taken away by the government, for instance. So I do think that's something that we can look at. And part of that discussion too would be getting rid of a lot of the tax credits and exemptions in the system to make it a lot more simple, so that you're treating every dollar the same. And I think that's the really important point when we're talking about flat tax systems.
Essentially, what we're seeing is an overall economic impact of $282 million. And that's made up of the first 150-ish million, which is the transactional side. It's direct spending. So that's what visitors to the city for the concerts will spend on hotels, on restaurants, on Ubers, and on other shopping and other activities they may do while they're here. But it's the money they spend when they're here. But the good news is that money doesn't stop working just because these people then get on a plane and go home again. That's new money coming into our economy. It didn't start the day in our economy, but it ends there and then continues to recirculate. So there's another $130 million that is what we would call the induced and indirect economic impact. So for example, when we spend $100 at a restaurant on a dinner, the restaurant then turns around and respends that same money. They'll spend it on labor. They spend it on ingredients. They may hire a design firm to redesign their menus or some signage in the restaurant. That's all new spending in our economy. So that initial $100 doesn't just stop at the first transaction. It continues to work. That produces tax revenue for multiple levels of government, particularly at the federal and provincial levels. It produces labor income. So there's an enormous economic impact. And again, what's important is this is new money coming into our economy. So it's how we grow our economy. And this shows you that events are critical drivers of doing that, because people travel for what they're passionate about. So when you have an event like this, it brings thousands, tens of thousands of new people into the destination and all that spending. And this study that we did just shows you what that impact looks like.
We have not changed or increased any taxes since we've been elected, only rolled them back. So we put in a 10% manufacturing tax credit in the last budget. Everything we've done is to roll back taxes, reduce taxes, no increases whatsoever. Your hunting and fishing license didn't even go up. I mean, we are pushing hard at reducing the cost. And then we've put in sort of family friendly and business friendly and farm friendly things like the 10 cent a liter gas tax reduction. So we're all about reducing. We're going the other way on the taxes. And so that has helped us when the business community around the world looks at Ontario and sees, okay, that's the stability, that's the credibility we want in a government, is that they understand lower taxes equals better business. So I got to put a cherry on top on this one. Okay. So here we are. We pulled on every government lever possible to lower the cost of doing business. So we've reduced our own revenue by $8 billion a year. And what did that do? Put 700,000 people to work. We saw billions, tens of billions of investment come in. But here's the really interesting one. The day we got elected, our revenue in Ontario was 154 billion. So we reduce our revenue and let business grow. Today, 5 years later, our revenue is 204 billion. So our revenue increased by 33% in 5 years. Lower taxes equals higher revenue. That's the formula.
What a list of guests that we had on our show. And that's not even all of our guests. We've had even more so this past year. We just couldn't fit them all into our show. So first thing I want to say thank you to all the guests that came on our show, the guests that we just showed here, and some of the others, or all the others that unfortunately we couldn't fit into our end of year clip. We heard from the Premier and Vic Fedeli talking about taxes, reducing taxes, and still yet increasing revenue to the province. And I know the Premier was saying doesn't like taxes and he will not raise taxes. So that was really something interesting to hear. Patty Lovett-Reed talking about diversification. AI is not going away. Technology, she continues to invest in it. Obviously, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, but definitely tech should be a part of a portfolio. Dan Kelly talking about, unfortunately, some of the poor policies that we have in place, not helping small business, productivity levels, as we talk about on this show all the time, showing that on a per capita basis, productivity is one of the lowest out there. We heard from Andrew Weir talking about the Swiftonomics, Taylor Swift, the effects on City of Toronto, 6 shows this past year, back in November, I believe. And what were the positives for the city, the province, the country? Also shows out in Vancouver as well. And last but definitely not least, we had Tim Sesnick, Jake Foss talking about flat tax, something that I think should be considered rather than having the progressive tax system and all these different tax rates and levels. And yes, for simplicity, but also I think that someone that yes could be making a little bit more money than somebody else. If they pay just a flat tax, say 25%, they would still pay more money in taxes than the other person making less money, but it would be equal and in terms of percentage. So something that Estonia, Jake Foss mentioned, is doing. So thank you once again to our great guests. And I look forward to perhaps talking with many of those guests again in 2025, and hopefully some new guests next year. And it promises again to be a fantastic year going forward.